Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. And if I could get your kind attention, thank you. Good morning. It is a privilege and honor to moderate this important discussion with such an esteemed group of experts. My name is Henry Saxon with the Center for Sustainable Communities. Our session this morning is a panel discussion on communicating and connecting with underserved communities to build resilience. As a nonprofit strategist and organizational development specialist, I understand the importance of human capital and how that capital can drive community impact. I want to begin by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to each of you for your unwavering passion and expertise to this critical work. As we gather in this space, I'm reminded of a powerful speech delivered by President Theodore Roosevelt, known as the man in the arena. This passage comes from a speech he delivered on April 23rd, 1910, at the Sorbonne in Paris, titled Citizenship in a Republic. The letter and the speech was crafted during a time of significant change here in the United States, but I believe it has relevance today, and I'd like to read that letter to you. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man or woman stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man or woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who actually does strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, great devotion, who spends himself or herself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he or she fails, at least fails with daring greatly. So that is his or her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So for me, this passage highlights several themes. The first is courage and effort. Roosevelt underscores that credit and deference belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, all of us, striving valiantly regardless of the outcome. This suggests that participation and effort are more important than mere success or failure. The second point is criticism and judgment. He acknowledged that those who criticize from the sidelines, right, often lack understanding of the true challenges faced by those who take action. And the last is the value of struggle. Roosevelt emphasizes that struggle itself is valuable and that those who dare to act, even if they fail, are far more honorable than those who do not attempt anything at all. The man in the arena serves as an important reminder for us to maintain resiliency and integrity in the face of criticism and turbulence. In the underserved communities we collaborate in, they need all of us to show up big to help address the issues that these communities face, many through no fault of their own. So it is within this context, I want to start a conversation full of engagement and rich dialogue. Now, our panelists' bios are in your programs, and now we'll begin with some prepared remarks. First, we'll hear from Dr. Jennifer Hirsch from Georgia Tech. Jennifer?
I'm going to stand up because I'm only 5 feet even when I'm standing. So it's hard to see past the podium. But good morning, everybody. I'm excited that Garry invited me here. It's great to be here for my first of these conferences. I am an applied cultural anthropologist, and I work at Georgia Tech running a program called the Center for Sustainable Communities Research and Education, which is all about facilitating and running community-engaged research and education partnerships across the Southeast that are about sustainability and equity. And so I was really struck by a couple things that were said yesterday, and I want to share what those things are and then tell a couple really quick stories. I've been thinking a lot about, this wasn't yesterday, but I just have been thinking a lot as we enter this new administration. I've been thinking a lot about some stuff we thought about during Trump 1, which was when we're not going to get support from the federal government and we're going to get active opposition from the federal government towards a lot of what we want to do, what does it mean to really work locally, regionally, and globally and bypass the federal, not national collaborations, but the federal government for the moment? And I think a lot of us leaned into that 8 years ago, and obviously it's time to lean into that again. So what does that mean? And something I think that this network tries to do. And we have a network that we have, actually Garry and I were two people that, with a bunch of other people, started in Atlanta that is called RCE, Greater Atlanta. It's actually a United Nations affiliated network. There are over 180 of them across the world. And they are about coming together. They're grounded in higher ed, but they're multi-stakeholder networks that also involve government and grassroots groups. And they're about coming together as a region to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals through education and training. So that is a network that we started that is a lot about one of the second points that I think Amanda made yesterday, which is about what does it really mean to lean into our relationships with grassroots organizations, communicate with them, but also support them, especially when they are going to be losing a lot of funding and support, especially coming off of the Biden-Harris Justice 40 support, where they had kind of unprecedented support from the federal level at that point. Oftentimes, especially from higher ed and government, I think when we lose support, they lose support too. And we need to figure out how we give them more support, not less, at a time like this, and what does that really mean? And then a third point that also came from yesterday is what does it really mean to think about social infrastructure as key to disaster preparation and response? That's a term that I love, that if some of you may know Eric Kleinenberg's work, he's a sociologist, and he talks a lot about the importance of social infrastructure. And one of the things in the talks yesterday that I thought was really important is when we're going to have less federal funding, what does it mean to move away from thinking primarily about the high-cost physical infrastructure investments to focus more on some of the low-cost things that actually often get really pushed aside when we have funding for physical infrastructure, even though all the research shows, and I'm a Chicagoan, and we had a very infamous heat wave that killed a lot of people decades ago. And one of the things we know, if you've seen some of Eric Kleinenberg's work, is that you can have contiguous communities, both low income, both communities of color. One had the highest mortality rate, one had the lowest, and that has been attributed to social infrastructure and kind of Jane Jacobs' eyes on the street type of stuff, if you know that work. But the idea that you can have all the cooling centers in the world, and if people aren't checking on each other, the people who are most vulnerable don't get to those cooling centers. And you don't necessarily need cooling centers if people are checking on people and helping them get where they need to be. So how do we really think about that? So I want to share just 2 quick stories about that and then pass it on. One is that right now we are doing something at Georgia Tech, which is we're calling community DAC. It's a community direct air capture. If you know what direct air capture is, right? A lot of the work that's being done at places like Georgia Tech is about this stuff that looks like science fiction in the future, but these huge decarbonization, right, technologies like direct air capture hydrogen, which the environmental justice communities have largely come out in opposition to. But a lot of money during Biden-Harris went into it through Justice 40. So what does it really mean? These are going to keep being developed whether the federal government is funding them at the moment or not. We have a window of opportunity here that, because they're, for the most part, they are not ready to deploy yet. So we have a window of opportunity to say, can we get ahead of this with equity? And can we really help communities understand what these technologies are and help the engineers and the scientists who are, and the business people who are developing these technologies take, you know, what Garry often talks about as environmental justice and community concerns as design criteria from the very beginning. And what does it look like to help develop those communication between those groups and help them mutually educate and understand each other? So that is a program that we're starting to run at Georgia Tech. We have, if you're interested in it, we have a whole workshop series. Many of the workshops are virtual, where we're trying to build this unlikely coalition of people understanding each other at the beginning of technology development rather than later. So that's one example. And then I wanted to ask my friend Keisha to tell one other example. Keisha, can you come up here? I'll give you the number. You knew I was going to ask you. I warned you. But Keisha is part of EJ Strong, and one of the things I asked her last night when we were having dinner is, within EJ Strong, if you could have one thing that you would get funding or support for that would improve like communication and relationships, what would you have? And this is what she said.
Hello, everyone. I said I would fund a community warning system, essentially a communication system that can be implemented in any community to help send out information, alerts, or what have you about a hazard coming. And on top of that, give instructions of how to protect yourself and your family. So with EJ Strong, that is something that has come up in every field practicum, every conversation. How do you communicate about the hazards to everyone and quickly? So, and it doesn't seem to be an actual system yet. I mean, we have Amber Alerts. You don't have to opt into the system. It just, if you're in the area, you'll get the alerts. And so that was what I said.
And Keisha, we should talk, because there's probably people at Georgia Tech that could develop that. But there might be many ideas that people could support for things like that. So I think one of the things I like to challenge ourselves to in a group like this is, how do we talk to our the people like the Ms. Collins is in the room, who your story yesterday I thought was the most impactful, at least for me, listening to your story. The EJ Strong, I was talking to Ms. Sharon this morning. How do we talk to our people who are doing the most on-the-ground grassroots work and figure out in the next year what are ways that this network as a whole, or individual people in this network and their organizations, can really do the things that they need that may not cost a lot of money or need federal funding at all to do. So, should I pass it on?
Yes. Okay. I'm going to actually stand up.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Well, then let me do my job. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Gavin Smith, North Carolina State.
I'm not trying to be a contrarian, but I do that sometimes. But I just want to be able to see everybody, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the next generation. So thank you for having me. My name is Gavin Smith. I'm a professor at North Carolina State University, but also am a former faculty member at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Taught there for 12 years and then moved to NC State. A little bit about myself, and then I want to tell you about several projects that are directly related to this panel. So I have a blended background. Half of my career was in practice. I had the pleasure of working for 4 governors, advising them on disaster recovery assistance, was an assistant director in North Carolina Emergency Management. And so a lot of my area of interest is hazard mitigation, disaster recovery, climate change adaptation, but also how do we better translate what we know, and we know a lot, into practice. and how do we engage communities over longer timescales, and had the good fortune of being able to do that in a number of states and actually do a lot of work like that overseas in the US and New Zealand. In fact, developing an international learning lab, because that was something one of the panelists talked about yesterday, is we're not doing a very good job of sharing lessons from each other, and we're not doing a very good job of taking those lessons and actually affecting change. And so that's just a bit of a shout out. But one of the things I'm most proud about is, as a faculty member, is teaching the next generation to go out and take care of all the mistakes we've made. And so I would ask that students, current and former, if they would just stand up real quick. I see several of you in the room. There's others. In fact, I see Rebecca is not officially a student of mine, but she worked very closely in a project that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So Rebecca also has done great work. Yeah. So thanks for all that. And one of the things I did want to just call out is, not call out, but suggest that, and I already told Amanda this, is the idea of turning your presentation into some kind of manifesto. Putting it on paper and sharing it was really inspirational. So that was really, really great. Yeah, yeah. And so I did, actually, we didn't talk about this, but I was doing that same thing that you were doing, kind of calling out the next generation. So thanks for doing that. So I'm going to tell you about a couple projects that we're working on, and we finished several, and we're working on a very large one, and I certainly want to share those that we've completed, and hopefully you can use them. And all of them I'm going to talk about very briefly are intended and done in a way, written in a way that should help communities of all types, all capacities, if you will. One, for those of you that are involved in the acquisition of hazard-prone housing, we've created an open space management guide. There's not really much out there on that, and it blends policy and design. So how do you thoughtfully use that land for commemoration and other things? All of these things are online. I can share them with you should you like. Another project that we have recently created is called the Coastal Hazards Overlay District, which is intended for communities in the coastal zone of all types. We have developed 51 design standards and planning techniques that span both accommodate, protect, manage, retreat, or community-led relocation and avoidance. And they're meant to be applied in the oceanfront, sound side, and riverine environments. And that document, in many ways, it goes back to the communication piece, is, and I'm not a designer, but I'm in the College of Design. I'm actually a land use planner, more of a policy planner. And so I'm convinced the third language that I'm learning, I talk about policy all the time, and I write policy all the time with different formats and so forth, with some success and a fair amount of failure. But now I'm learning a third language, which is the role of design and visually depicting varied policy options at multiple scales. I'm absolutely convinced that that could be the future and things that we ought to be thinking about, because we have good ideas. We talk about policy, a flood ordinance or some other larger policy, but we don't do a good job of conveying what it is to a person that lives in a community. And designers are trained to depict, to me, the way I see it, is they're depicting policy options at multiple scales, and a visual image is really powerful. It can be really effective in terms of getting buy-in from individual citizens, reticent elected officials at local, state, and fingers crossed, federal level. So those are some things to perhaps think about. We've also finished a National Academy of Science study that's looking at community-led relocation on the Gulf Coast. I encourage you to take a look at that. We looked at Ile de Jean Charles. We interviewed people there. We interviewed people in Tampa. We interviewed people in the Houston, Galveston Bay Area, where I grew up, and so forth. And there's a series of action steps that we believe could be taken that try to balance, which is incredibly difficult. And this is a big part of my career, has been dealing with community-led relocation while recognizing deep place attachment and sense of place, and people don't want to leave their home place. My family home, I grew up on Galveston, it was destroyed by a hurricane, but we had the money to move, and I moved my mother to Raleigh, North Carolina, but a lot of people don't have those resources, the means to do it. They may be tied to that piece of land for all kinds of reasons, whether they're fishers, shrimpers, they have deep historical ties. So I'm not suggesting that it is an either or. And in fact, a lot of our work that I was just discussing at least provides people with the options and gives them a greater menu of choices to think about. But the project that I really wanted to focus in on, and I'm certainly seeking all of you to perhaps help with us, and Yanhua, could you raise your hand? Yanhua is a postdoc of ours. She is helping me. She has actually been at the poster. If you get a chance, take a look at poster number 19. We are developing a nationwide university and engagement network in every state and territory. This is funded by FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security. And we have so far 160 some odd members, give or take, that have signed on. And the goal is to have faculty, extension agents, including people from Sea Grant, by the way, very important for those of you in Sea Grant, that can assist under-resourced or poor communities write successful hazard mitigation grants and plans. And so and so FEMA has supported this. And so we finished year one. In fact, if you're interested, we can also share with you a year one report that lays out in detail what we've done. And what we did is we first interviewed people that are in universities that have written award-winning brick or building resilient infrastructure and communities grants, which if those of you that have tried, it's not easy. The people we interviewed, some of them are 4 for 4 on writing grants. They all happen to be in my home department at NC State, which is pretty cool because they're down the street or down the hall. And so we interviewed them. We used that information to develop a nationwide survey that we sent out to over 800 faculty members across the country and extension folks. We took that information, and that information has been used to develop an operational guidance tool or framework to carry this out. And so we've now moved into year two, and year two is very much focused on continuing to build the network. So those of you that are at universities, those of you that are in extension, those of you that are in Sea Grant, I'm certainly reaching out to you. We'd love to have you on board. And in year two, we're developing a set of training modules that are targeted to faculty. So for example, this may sound a little esoteric, but how do we get our department heads to give us the opportunity to engage with communities in lieu of perhaps writing a journal article that 15 other people read or something like that. That's a little cynical, but the fact of the matter is we're talking about very specific things that we could do that are targeting faculty members to help them, encourage them to join. And the good news is in the framework we have developed with FEMA a funding mechanism to do this. So it's not just doing it because you're a good person, of which all of you in the room are, but rather we are working with FEMA to identify the funding mechanisms that would pay for faculty and graduate students to work either on their own, working in poor communities, or partnering with other groups like FEMA staff and or consultants to do this work in every state and territory. So it's a really big project, and we certainly need your help with all of that. So a couple other notes is we're also on the second year, we're developing an evaluation tool, a protocol. I know that we talked about this yesterday. How do we evaluate whether we're making a difference? And so that's something we've taken to heart. And so we are developing tools to assess the quality of the training we deliver to get feedback. And we're also going to develop tools that we will interview local officials that received our assistance to say, hey, did we do a good job or not? What were the weaknesses? How could we improve? And then finally, we're going to be interviewing those faculty members that delivered the aid as to what are the things that may have hampered their capabilities to do this. So we're just moving into year two. We definitely would love to have you as part of the team. Yanhua and I will be taking names, if you will, if you're interested, and we'd certainly love to have you join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith and Dr. Brown. We'd certainly have to have you come up and share your thoughts.
Thank you so much. So a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing now that may be of interest. I helped start and develop a lived experience training academy with the National Coalition for the Homeless. And the idea, really, one of the things that we're looking at is how do we make public policy and even institutions, academic institutions even, how do we make it more equity-centered and community engaged? Because often we have these hierarchies, and even when we look at environmental spaces, often they have lacked diverse representation. Really, really visibly so, right? And it's something that's not going to change unless we're intentional about changing that. So how do we do that? And so with the Lived Experience Training Academy, we work with people unsheltered or who have lived experience of homelessness. We are going all around the nation. We started with local power tours where we talk to people at ground level, people whose communities have been completely flooded, disrupted, lives changed, people who are fleeing domestic violence and intimate partner abuse, right? All sorts of situations and narratives. Within that, we're also looking at the environmental factors of what it means with housing instability. And how do we start to think about environment in terms of both housing justice, both in terms of homelessness prevention, but also addressing, right, and sustaining housing in safe ways. Because one of the other pieces we've been looking at is so many times, even when people are moved into transitional housing, it is not safe environment. Higher lead content, again, placed by factories, higher levels of pollution, and again, we see racial disparities with this also that we just cannot ignore, right? Indigenous, Black, brown communities disproportionately impacted. And so really trying to put all of that together to kind of center. Another big piece of the work that I've been doing at the federal, national level is really trying to bring together cross-agency communication. So often, you know, you have the Office of Housing and Urban Development working on specific unsheltered pieces that are going on in communities, including communities that are impacted by climate, but there's not often this kind of cross-thread of communication even fully with FEMA, right? Fully with the US Department of Education as children are being impacted, shuffled. And so how do we start to, again, bring those conversations full circle? And how do we also make sure that people in communities who are most impacted are at decision-making tables? And not just, you know, having the seat, but really being listened to and given agency to start to be part of change-making. Because this is also part of what I see as a huge problem in some of the work that we do, is a lot of times we have brilliant thinkers, right? Brilliant thinkers, people doing the work, but again, if we're not talking to people, impacted people in communities, we lose sight, and often we actually end up perpetuating trauma and harm, even unintentionally, right? And so we've got to change that. And I think it starts by making sure that people, diverse representation, you know, conversations that are authentic at the ground level. One of the big pushes in my work now is to change how we see academic institutions, right? No longer this kind of institution of knowledge. We, in fact, have a lot to learn from community, right? So let's extend our campuses. Let's make sure that we are working alongside each other for environmental justice and change, and to build a sustainable, more loving world for all. And so those partnerships become really, really important with that work. Another piece is the educational piece. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I won't say too much about this, but one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is how do we start to teach, even as we think about disaster preparedness? How do we start to even think about teaching our youngest children from a young age about environment, about what it means to be climate resilient, having those conversations. So I'm really working to try to expand curriculum, not always an easy thing to do because you have obviously federal mandates, state, district, right? Local schools have their pieces, but yet it's so essential. And we know some of the research I'm doing now with children and youth is showing really, really huge eco-affinity gaps, where there are so many disconnects in really understanding and feeling connected to nature and planet in so many ways. And of course, there's a lot of reasons for this, including if you think about the digital world we live in, right? That's definitely one of the reasons. But we have a lot of heaviness in our world as well. And so a lot of the youth, right, are not also having place and space and time to really experience the joys of planet. And if you don't have those kind of connection points, how do you care? Right? How do you make that difference? And so some of it I'm working on now is educational guides. So even as we're talking, how do we make the stuff that we're doing more inclusive, more user-friendly? We talk in a lot of jargons, a lot of high-level language. A lot of times what we found is even during disaster relief, as information is being put out, many times it doesn't reach the people who are needing it most. And again, how do we show up for each other, right? That's important. But it's also things about language, right? Right now, we have some of the highest illiteracy and low literacy levels that our nation has ever seen. Ever seen. And so even if you start to look at the materials that are often put out into the world around disaster, it really is very limited to who has access to that knowledge. And so I love your idea too, right? The alert system. And then even taking that further to say, how can we make it inclusive as we're teaching people to be prepared, right? To protect themselves, to protect family, and also to have agency to be part of change that is needed in our world. That is huge as well. And so that is some of the work, and I'm happy to share more as well later. But I want to pass the mic back to Henry to pass it back to Garry.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. And a man who needs no introduction, I think most of you know. But a guy that's I've been impressed with, had the privilege to work with. And I've been doing nonprofit work for more than 30 years. And I know a good organization when I see one, and I know the mechanics that go into modernizing and optimizing a nonprofit. That is what this organization does. So, Garry, we'd love to hear from you, and please share your thoughts.
Okay. All right, morning. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Well, we're the Center for Sustainable Communities. We're all about making communities greener, cleaner, healthier, safer, and more climate resilient through equity and environmental justice. We're trying to make a more just, sustainable, equitable, and resilient world for all. Last year we did some 80 different projects and activities and stuff, all about trying to, again, make this a more just, sustainable, equitable world for all. And we use science, we use engineering, we use technology, data science, research, and something that we call just science or justice science. And again, trying to mitigate social, racial, climate, environmental, and health disparities as well. Again, we're driving out solutions. But we can do all of that. But if we're not communicating those solutions to those communities, and they're not listening, they're not hearing and such, then it's all for naught. If action plans are not being created around extreme heat, and we're not communicating, the health impacts and the stuff that should be done in terms of planting trees and mitigating extreme heat, then it's all for naught. If the air pollution, is bad and it's impacting communities, and trucks are driving through them by communities and adjacent to communities all day long, but communities don't know the harm that's being done to them, then it's all for naught. So we're scratching our heads, we're doing all this stuff, and we're having fun at it, and we're making some impact, and we're doing what it takes, but how do we communicate this? So okay, let's call a town hall. Okay, we get 30 people in there. Okay, let's go to a church, and plug into a ministry. Okay, we get 15 people there. All right, I'll tell you what, let's go out and canvass the community. All right, on a Sunday afternoon, where we get 50 people there. So how do we communicate to the masses, about all of these harms, about this injustice, about climate and social and racial justice and such. And more than that, how do we empower people? Well, and also people, particularly in communities, tend to listen to trusted messengers, folks who they believe in, like the pastor or, even the lady selling candy out of her house, that sort of thing. And those sorts of things, those are the trusted messages in the community. So how can we reach these people en masse? How can we make them listen to this? And more importantly, how do we make them ask themselves the question, why is this important to me? particularly when it comes to climate. So we decided to collaborate with a media company called Odyssey. Okay, and Odyssey is no run-of-the-mill company. It has 220 radio stations throughout the country, and they do not only radio, they do podcasts, and they do billboards, et cetera, And we came to them and we said, we want to collaborate with you, to ensure that these messages are reaching our communities. And Odyssey has 220 radio stations all throughout the country, and primarily in urban markets. Those hard to reach communities. Those communities on the South Side. And so how do we communicate those messages to them? Well, they tune into the radio. So we decided to partner, again, with Odyssey on a program called On Point with Wandalyn Stokes, okay? And if you don't know Wandalyn Stokes, she's a radio legacy in Georgia. Some 40 years in the radio, a trusted messenger, somebody who people listen to. Again, in those communities who need to hear this, in those communities who seldom get to hear this and such. Again, Wandalyn said, hey, I'll take on this task of communicating why our community must care about climate. So we did one radio show, okay, and it went fairly well. And then we did another one. It went fairly well. So we have done now 14 different radio sessions and such, reaching anywhere from 3 to 5 million people with this message of why our community must care about climate. We've had between 50 to 60 guests, and some of you have been guests, academics and researchers and community leaders, and elected officials, again, coming on air, to answer that question about why this is important, why we need to listen to this, what action needs to be taken. So in terms of cultivating collaboration, in terms of communications, in terms of getting messages out and such, we used this old style communications method, again, to reach into the urban communities, to get to grandmama's house, and tell grandmama about extreme heat and why this is important. So every time now, for about 5 or 6 years now, when there's an extreme climate impact, okay, we huddle up at Odyssey and such and figure out, who needs to be on the show and what date it needs to be, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a big radio company, but now they understand that this is important messaging. So they are solidly behind this. We're so excited about it. So we've had panels on extreme heat, on recent hurricanes and such, and sea level rise as well. Again, trying to get that message out, as often, as frequently as possible, so that communities can be empowered. We talk about community engagement. It has to be intentional, has to be deliberate, has to be frequent, it has to be routine, but it has to be heard and empowered as well. We found a way to do it. We're excited about it, okay? Why our community should care about climate. Tune in.
Thank you, Gary. We're running short on time, so I want to exercise a little point of privilege. I've asked Dr. Hirsch to moderate a couple of questions, so I think we got time to get a couple, 3 questions in, generative questions, and then I would encourage all of you who need to connect with some of our panelists post this session, please feel free to do that. So, but do want to respect the time. So a couple of 3 generative questions. Jennifer?
Okay. All right, one of the things we talked about doing instead of kind of traditional Q&A is we want to see what people are taking away from this conversation about communication and collaboration between, and I think we've all been focusing on what it means for institutions or government entities to be really collaborating and communicating with with community-based organizations and with grassroots communities. So thinking about that, I think you all have note cards on your tables, or you may be just taking your own notes, but if you could take like 30 seconds to yourself and jot down one of two things. Either just a really key idea that you've taken away either from these talks or from anything the last day and a half about this topic, or jot down so either a general idea or something specific that you yourself want to think about doing in your own work after this conference that would maybe change the way that you do collaboration or communication between bigger institutions and grassroots communities. So either an idea in general or a particular thing you want to look into doing after this. So maybe just take 30 seconds to write something down, and then we're going to ask some of you to share. Okay, we got about 5 seconds left. Okay, so I'd like to start with just some general ideas about communication and collaboration that you're taking away from the conference so far. So we're gonna get about 4 people to share their ideas. So if you're over on this side and you haven't really said anything yet in the conference and you have not been a speaker up here, we want to hear from people who haven't spoken yet. Can a couple of you stand up if you have an idea that you can share very quickly that you have written down? Over here. 2 or 3 people, please stand up. Okay, we've got 3 people. So Lauren, I know your name, so we'll start with you. Why don't you quickly share your idea?
Sure, it's an idea and a question. So I'm Lauren, I'm from the Atlanta Regional Commission in Atlanta, Georgia. And my question is, how can we create mutual aid networks that are community-driven and cross-sectorally supported? So I'm thinking about how can governments, industries support mutual aid networks?
So we're bringing the concept of mutual aid into the conversation. All right. I don't know your name, but I'm Kayla.
Hi, my name is Kayla. I'm a master's student at NC State University. I was actually really moved by what you were saying on the panel because during the last Trump administration, I was in high school. So I've been thinking a lot about talking to people about, well, what happened last time? Because this is the first time this is happening for a lot of us young people. So I really liked what you were saying about starting locally and regionally and globally, and just, it doesn't mean that we can't move forward. And I was in this dark headspace that we were just going to continue to move backwards and we just couldn't do anything about it, but there's still ways that we can move forward without the federal government.
And Yanel?
What Dr. Gavin Smith said about designers depict policy action at various scales really resonated with me. I'm a designer. You'll hear about that later in the last session. Stay until the last session. And we can see that very clearly when Holly presented yesterday, because the future is uncertain, and depicting that future with creativity, which has been a theme throughout, really is what we need to get inspired and get people to mobilize into action.
Thank Thank you. So we're thinking about scale and mutual aid and maybe learning from the past. Okay, so now I'm going to just move over to this side. I'm going to skip the middle. Oh, do you have one? Stand up, please. Yep. I guess I'm going to ask Heather, is it okay if we take maybe just 4 more quick and then wrap it up? Okay, we will do that in 5 minutes. Are you sharing a big idea or an action step? Okay, good. That's a good transition.
So my name is Chiquetta Green. I'm from the South Carolina Department of Environmental Services. I work in environmental justice and work with E.J. Strong. I've heard a lot about being a science communicator. So I think there is an opportunity for higher ed and government agencies to work together, especially our state agencies that are in the regulatory field. We have to communicate with the community a lot, and it's a lot of technical jargon. So how can we best engage the community, make sure they're informed so that they can give a better comment on the things that we regulate.
Thank you. Science communication made accessible. All right, over here, I'd love to hear just 2 final things of people who have something they really want to take and move forward, people who have not been speakers and who have not spoken. Yes, stand up.
Thank you, everyone. My name's Anna. I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and I'm an urban planner. And I was just taken back by the increased confidence to keep speaking up in meetings with consultants to tell them, yes, this is in the scope of your project. For example, the last year I was in several meetings about a transportation project to fix a railroad crossing, at-grade railroad crossing at a busy intersection. And there was a homeless population removed from that site, and there are many people who walk and bike along that site where only cars are really made for it. And in every meeting, I was so proud of our team to continue to say, consider all types of roadway users. Not everyone has access to a car. So it's great to be in a space like this where you do have that increased confidence to say, it is important for all of us in every meeting to speak up, and especially for homeless populations and those that cannot be in the meeting themselves.
Somebody, final last word. Anybody over here who had not spoken yet, who has something they want to share as an action step? Yes. You can close us out.
Hi, my name is Luke Robertson. I work for the Institute for Water and Health at Georgia Southern University in Savannah, and I'm always a big proponent of more science communication. I work a lot with community-based participatory research, but I love to see a bigger blend of quantitative and qualitative data. A lot of times we see a lot of quantitative data, a lot of surveys and like that, trying to get as many as you can, but the context is really, really what matters a lot more to a lot of folks. So I like to see that blend of mixed methods into our science to where the voices of the people really can be heard more in the science results.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. And as we close, I want to let's give one more hand, a round of applause to our esteemed panelists. And nice job. And really quickly, as for those of you, I want to amplify what this session was about, and it was about communicating and connecting with underserved communities to build resilience, right? And these communities don't need your benevolence. They need clear-eyed, pragmatic solutions with culturally intelligent practitioners to help them, So let's go back armed with that kind of energy and really make a difference. Thank you for your participation, and more importantly, thank you for all that you do in this space, and we're all proud to serve together. Thank you.